Hi everyone, it's Mr. H here. Today we're going to talk about hypotheses and sources of data. Now, when you think about a hypothesis, you might think about science class, but nonetheless, what we're going to find as we collect information, collect two variable data, we're going to find that we could set a hypothesis about it. And what we saw yesterday is this idea that the more someone studies for a test, the higher mark they would get. But we could include some other examples of hypotheses that we'll look at in a moment. First off, I want us to note that the study of statistics is something that is the collection, organization, and analysis of numerical data. And in the light of COVID-19 and everything our world has faced, statistics is more relevant than ever. And so if we don't understand statistics, we're not going to be able to make as informed decisions about what's going on around us in the world. An hypothesis, I say an hypothesis because I think technically if you have an H beginning the word, you say the word "an" in front. Anyway, that's grammar. Let's get back to math. A hypothesis or an hypothesis is a statement that can be proven as true or false. So some examples of hypotheses include this. The more homework students do, the better they do on a test. This is something I've seen in general for all the courses I've taught. A second hypothesis is this: skiing is more popular than snowboarding at Redeemer. And lastly, the taller someone is, the higher they can jump. So these are all possible hypotheses that we could put in place. And you could even say, well, actually, I don't think what you said is true. I think it's actually going to be the opposite. So for example, you might say, and this would be considered an opposite hypothesis, instead of saying the more homework students do, the better they do on a test, you might conclude the following. You might think the more homework students do, the worse they do on a test. Or the less homework students do, the better they do on a test. And if you think about this for a minute, we're changing only one of the descriptive words, and they're actually saying the same thing. So the more homework, the worse they do, then it follows that the less homework, the better they do. Now, in general, this is not a hypothesis that I would think, but it's something that is saying the same thing, and it's the opposite hypothesis of the more they do, the better they do. Notice if you change both descriptive words. If you were to say the more homework students do, the better they do, and change it to the less homework students do, the worse they do on a test, you're saying the same thing, right? Let me just write that beside. The less homework students do, the worse they do on a test. Well, that's the same as saying the more they do, the better they do. Okay, so be careful about changing both words. So just think about that, and you can comment on that down below. It says, is the less homework students do, the worse they do on a test, the same or opposite of hypothesis A? Why? It is the same because both descriptive words have been changed. Both descriptive words changed. So that's really what you should reflect on that. So you're going to be required to write hypotheses in the homework today and then opposite hypotheses. A second idea that we have here is this idea of primary and secondary data. Primary data is data that's collected directly by a researcher for a specific purpose. So let's say you wanted to know how many people liked chocolate ice cream, and you were to go out and ask people directly. That's primary data. However, if someone came along with that information and said, hey, you've already collected this data, and I'm going to use it to determine something else with that data. Let's say you would ask how many people had collected chocolate ice cream, but you said, I'm going to take that data and I'm going to use it to determine if a person is cool or not. Then now you have used it not for the same purpose, maybe a similar purpose, but not for the same purpose, and you specifically, you have not been the one to collect the data. Somebody else has collected the data. So that's the idea behind secondary data. Someone else has collected it. So we want to indicate if each of the following are primary or secondary data. So I encourage you to pause the video, answer these yourself, and then check your answers with me after you're done. So having assumed that you've paused the video and done that, let's move forward. Survey the students and ask them what their favorite drink is. Well, you have surveyed the students. This is primary data. Going to several stores to find the cheapest jeans. Again, you're going to the stores directly to find the cheapest jeans. So again, you're the one doing the research. It's primary data. Now you go online and find a chart of data indicating favorite drinks of teenagers. Somebody else has compiled that already. So that is secondary data. You poll 40 students to find out which video game is their favorite. Again, this idea of you polling them specifically for that purpose is primary data again. Collecting data from the weather network for the time of sunset each day. This is tricky, right? But you are not the one doing the research. So if you are collecting the data from somebody else, it's secondary. So this technically is secondary. If you were the one to actually measure the time of the sunrise and sunset each day, then it would be primary. Your friend tells you where to find the cheapest jeans. Well, clearly, it's your friend doing it. It's secondary. This next case is a little tricky for some people. Asking a store what their top selling video game is. Now you're asking the store, but the store has compiled that information themselves. So you're getting it as a secondary person from what the store has already compiled. So this is technically considered to be secondary. And finally, you monitor the time of sunset every day. I've already mentioned this. That was comparing to this one up here, and this in this case would be primary. All right, so that's primary and secondary data. So the last thing we're going to cover today is a few concepts, and those are population, sample, and census. Population is the whole group of people or items being studied. So in Canada, the population of Canada is everybody who lives in Canada. In our school, the population would be everybody in our school. So the population of our school would be all students and teachers. So if you took all the students and the teachers, you'd be, I think, somewhere around 175 people. A sample is any group of people or items being studied. So it's part of the population, not all the population. A census is surveying all the members of the population. So just like when you go to Costco and you get a sample of popcorn, well, before COVID, when you got a sample of popcorn, you would go ahead and you'd get a little bit of the popcorn. But if you wanted to take a census of that bag of popcorn, you would literally have to eat every piece of popcorn in that bag. Same idea with collecting information. So what would you need to do to take a census of our school? You'd have to ask all 175 people, roughly, all 175 people, the question or the questions. That would be a census. What is a good sample of our school? Well, I would think, depending on what you're asking, you might want to say, hey, let's choose 5 grade 9s, 6 grade 10s. Hold up a second. Why would I choose a different number of a different grade? So that should be a question for you, right? No, if we were going to get a good sample, we'd probably choose the same number of each grade. That would be a good sample of our school. So those are the ideas that you're going to be working with today. All the best as you do that work, and reach out if you have any questions.